Okay, let's unpack this because, usually when we talk about a legal contract, there's this expectation of like absolute precision.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you expect the math to be perfect.
Right. Think about a standard 30-year mortgage. You agree to pay a highly specific amount of money at a specific interest rate over, a very specific number of months.
And you read the fine print, you sign the paper, and the math is just full of the math.
Exactly. It's locked in stone.
It's entirely predictable. I mean, you either have the funds in your checking account to cover that monthly withdrawal or you don't.
Right.
It's a completely clean ledger. And we find comfort in that because it's grounded in a visible, undeniable reality.
But then you step away from the bank and you look at the world of Western water law, specifically the rules governing the Colorado River.
Yeah, that's where it all falls apart.
It really does. Suddenly, that clean ledger is just completely broken. We are looking at a legal and diplomatic landscape that is, frankly, terrifyingly murky.
It is the absolute definition of a mathematical house of cards. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Because we are talking about a 1,450-mile lifeline here.
Yeah, it's massive.
This single river system supplies roughly 40 million people across 7 U.S. states, 30 different Native American tribes, and the entire country of Mexico.
And to figure out how this lifeline got so unbelievably tangled, we've pulled an incredible stack of source materials for our deep dive today.
We really have.
We're looking at this massive public history dossier outlining the 1922 Colorado River Compact, the 1944 U.S.-Mexico Water Treaty, and all these subsequent diplomatic agreements they call minutes.
Plus, we've got the raw, on-the-ground operational data from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah, the actual numbers. And maybe most chillingly, we have these stark scientific assessments. Like there's this deeply unsettling report from the Colorado River Research Group titled, and I love this title, Dancing with Deadpool.
It's a great title for a terrifying reality. But, the central paradox in all these documents is something we really have to wrap our heads around right now.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The Colorado River is the fundamental plumbing of the American Southwest. It's the lifeblood of massive cities and this huge agricultural empire. And it is also a highly sensitive diplomatic instrument between two sovereign nations.
Right.
But the crux of the crisis is this. The river was legally carved up, and every single drop was promised out on paper decades before anyone accurately measured the volume of water it actually carried.
I mean, that is just wild to me. It really is like writing checks out of your account, assuming you have $1 billion, without ever once checking your actual balance.
Exactly. You just assume the money will be there because, well, you want it to be there.
Yeah, you just hope for the best.
And the resulting chaos operates on a core premise that might actually surprise people. There is no single villain in this story.
Really? No bad guy?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
When you dig into the complex legal web of the Colorado River, you find that practically everyone's water allocation is senior to someone else's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So everyone has a legally valid, historically ironclad reason for demanding their exact share of the river.
Which is exactly what makes it a nightmare to untangle.
A total nightmare, yeah.
And, it's so easy to look at this and think, well, I live in Ohio or New York or Florida. I don't live in a desert, so this isn't my problem.
Right, the out of sight, out of mind mentality.
Exactly. But if you, the listener, if you bought winter lettuce or broccoli or carrots at your local grocery store this week, your life is tethered to this river.
It absolutely is.
The structural stability of the entire U.S. agricultural economy relies on the precise elevation of water in two distant, drastically shrinking reservoirs out west. Lake Mead and Lake Powell.
That invisible dependence is so profound. The food on a dinner plate in a New England winter is fundamentally subsidized by a quiet, kind of desperate negotiation over an overpromised river in the Mojave Desert.
So to understand how the bank account got overdrawn, we have to look at the original math.
Right back to the beginning.
Yeah, we have to go back to 1922. This is the foundation of the entire system, the 1922 Colorado River Compact. A group of men essentially drew a line across the map and divided the river basin right down the middle.
Yeah, they split it into the upper basin, which is Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, and then the lower basin, which is Arizona, California, and Nevada.
Okay.
And the negotiators, they needed a magic number to make everyone feel secure enough to actually sign the thing.
Right, they needed a guarantee.
Exactly. So they settled on 7.5 million. They apportioned 7.5 million acre-feet of water per year to the upper basin and another 7.5 million acre-feet to the lower basin.
Okay, I need to pause here because that term acre-feet, it's going to come up constantly today, and it sounds like bureaucratic jargon.
It kind of is, yeah.
Let's visualize this for everyone. If you picture a standard American football field, and you flood that entire field with exactly 1 foot of water, that volume is 1 acre-foot.
That's a great way to picture it.
It's roughly, what, 326,000 gallons?
Yeah, right around there.
So in practical terms, 1 acre-foot is generally enough water to supply 2 or 3 average suburban households for an entire year.
That is the perfect visual. So 7.5 million of those flooded football fields to the upper basin,
Right.
and 7.5 million to the lower basin. That's 15 million acre-feet committed on paper right out of the gate.
But the mindset of the negotiators in 1922 is what just blows my mind.
Oh, it's fascinating.
They based this monumental legal agreement, which, still dictates life for 40 million people today, on a massive assumption.
It really did.
It's comparable to budgeting your family's lifetime expenses based on the single best paycheck you ever brought home and just blindly assuming you'll make that exact inflated amount every single week for the rest of your life.
That is essentially the historical reality of what happened, because when those commissioners met in 1922, they were relying on stream gauge records from an anomalously wet stretch of years.
Just a total souk of weather.
Yeah, they were looking at a tiny, unusually generous window of climate history. And based on that one little snapshot, they assumed the river reliably carried between 16.5 and 17.5 million acre-feet of water every single year.
So they thought, great, 15 million divided up, we still have a buffer of 1 million or 2 left over.
Exactly.
But that was a fatal mathematical flaw.
Completely fatal. Because over the long run, looking at centuries of tree ring data that we have now, the river simply does not carry that much water. Nature was never going to cash the checks they wrote.
Wow.
This introduces the most critical concept in our sources, the structural deficit.
Yeah, the structural deficit. That sounds like a corporate accounting term.
Yeah.
But applied to a river, it implies like a permanent built-in bankruptcy.
That's precisely what it is. A structural deficit means that before you even factor in the massive amounts of water lost to evaporation under the hot desert sun,
Which is a lot.
a huge amount, and before you account for the international obligations to Mexico that would be added later on.
Right.
The basic promises written into the 1922 Compact already exceeded the river's actual long-run average physical flow. The ledger was bankrupt from the moment the ink dried.
They institutionalized an overdraw.
They did.
They promised more water than nature actually provides. And for a long time, we masked that bankruptcy with incredible engineering, right?
Oh, absolute marvels of engineering.
Yeah, we built Hoover Dam in the 1930s and Glen Canyon Dam in the 1960s. We created these massive piggy banks to capture every single drop of excess runoff during the rare wet years.
Right, so we could keep spending during the dry years. We've built a massive buffer.
Right.
Those two massive reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, they could hold enough water to equal roughly 4 years of the river's entire average flow.
4 years? That's insane.
It was an astonishing savings account, and it allowed water managers to just kind of juggle the math for decades.
But then the calendar flips to the 21st century.
And the juggling act collapses.
Because the rules of the climate itself begin to change. We transition from a chronic math problem into an acute existential crisis.
Yes.
And it's driven by phenomena that our sources distinguish very carefully.
Yeah.
We aren't just dealing with a drought here. We are dealing with a ridification.
The distinction between those two terms is so critical for understanding the modern Colorado River.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so a drought is cyclical. It's a temporary dry period. You suffer through it, you tighten your belt, but eventually the weather patterns shift and the rains return to normal.
Right, it's a phase.
Exactly. But a retification is not a cycle. It is a fundamental, permanent shift in the baseline climate.
Oh, well.
The atmosphere itself is warming, and that heat is actively baking the moisture out of the entire landscape.
So it's not simply a lack of snow in the Rocky Mountains. It's that the physical environment is responding to the snow entirely differently.
Yes, exactly. Because when the atmosphere warms, the soil across the entire basin becomes incredibly parched.
Like a sponge.
Right, like a bone-dry sponge. So even when the Rockies receive what historically would have been considered a normal winter snowpack, the spring runoff is completely compromised.
Because of the soil.
Yeah. When that snow begins to meld, The dry, baked earth aggressively soaks up the water before it can ever reach the streams and tributaries that feed the main river.
And the warmer air plays a direct role too, right? Because
Hmm.
the heat changes how the snow behaves before it even has a chance to melt.
Yeah, that process is called sublimation.
Sublimation, okay.
Warmer air temperatures mean a significant portion of the snowpack essentially bypasses the liquid phase altogether.
Wait, it just skips being water.
Yeah. It sublimates directly from solid ice and snow into water vapor, and it's just lost to the atmosphere. It never even hits the dirt, let alone the river.
The scientific data on this in our sources is just staggering.
It's really grim.
Because of this aridification sponge effect and the sublimation, a year of quote-unquote normal snowfall
Mhm.
today yields roughly half the runoff into the river that it would have yielded 50 or 60 years ago
Off the water.
from the exact same amount of snow.
Yep. And when you look at the macro numbers, the brutal reality of the 1922 math becomes undeniable. The negotiators built the system assuming 16.5 million acre-feet of flow.
Right. That was the baseline.
But today, the 26-year running average flow of the Colorado River has plummeted to about 12.2 million acre-feet.
Wow.
That is an almost 26% drop from the assumed baseline.
A quarter of the river just vanished into thin air.
Literally.
And the scientists are pointing out that this isn't an anomaly, right?
Yeah.
This mega drought that began around the year 2000 is heavily driven by human-caused atmospheric warming.
Yes.
And the really terrifying part is the projections. Brad Udall, he's a prominent scientist from the Colorado River Research Group. He warns that planners need to prepare for a potential additional 20% decline in flow as warming trends continue.
Yeah, and if you take another 20% off a river that is already down 26%, the massive reservoirs we built to save us simply cannot function.
They just fail.
Which brings us to a term that, used to be pure science fiction for water managers, but is now driving real-world policy.
Deadpool.
Deadpool.
I know when people hear Deadpool, they immediately think of the guy in the red superhero suit.
Oh, sure, Ryan Reynolds.
Right. But in the world of hydrology, Deadpool is the ultimate nightmare scenario. Let's physically break down what happens at a dam when it hits Deadpool.
Okay, to understand Deadpool, you have to visualize how massive concrete dams like Hoover and Glen Canyon actually work.
Okay.
They aren't just giant walls holding back water, they are machines.
Right. They generate power.
Exactly. They generate hydroelectric power, and they manage downstream flow. And to do this, they have massive intake tubes called penstocks built right into the face of the dam, deep underwater.
So the water pressure pushes the lake water into these penstocks. It rushes down through the tubes, spins the massive turbines to generate electricity, and then shoots out the bottom of the dam to continue flowing down the river channel.
Exactly. Gravity does all the work.
Right.
But those intake penstocks are not located at the absolute very bottom of the canyon floor.
Oh, they're not.
No, they are situated at a specific elevation on the upstream face of the dam.
Okay.
So Deadpool is the precise elevation where the surface level of the reservoir drops below those intake tubes.
Meaning the water can no longer physically enter the tubes? Gravity just stops working for you?
The lake level is too low. Water can literally no longer pass through the dam to flow downstream.
Wow.
The hydroelectric turbines go quiet, the power grid loses a massive source of energy, and the river below the dam essentially dries up.
It just stops.
The reservoir becomes a dead, stagnant lake.
And for decades, that concept was just a modeler's abstraction, wasn't it?
Totally. It was a mathematical extreme that scientists ran on supercomputers just to see what the absolute worst-case scenario looked like.
Nobody thought it would actually happen.
No one seriously thought Hoover Dam would ever stop releasing water.
But look at the title of the late 2025 assessment from the Colorado River Research Group, Dancing with Deadpool.
Right.
It has moved from theoretical modeling into official, urgent contingency planning.
Because that massive savings account is gone.
Yeah.
Due to the combination of the 1922 structural deficit and modern aridification, Lakes Mead and Powell have sat more than two-thirds empty.
It's so visible, too. You can look at photos of Lake Mead and see these massive, bright white bathtub rings on the Red Canyon walls, hundreds of feet high.
Yeah, that white rock is a visual monument to the water that used to be there. It's a monument to a broken math equation.
And when the pie shrinks that dramatically, the immediate question becomes, who is eating the biggest slice?
Right. If the bank account is dry, who is still writing the biggest checks?
Which brings us to California.
Oh, yes.
We have to talk about the juggernaut of the lower basin. We have to talk about the power of senior water rights and the absolute pain of forcing a cut. because the numbers here are just wild.
They really are.
Out of the lower basin's 7.5 million acre-foot apportionment, California holds the single largest state share on the entire river. They're entitled to 4.4 million acre-feet.
That is nearly 60% of the entire lower basin's legal allocation going to one single state.
Now, I want to clear up something that I definitely assumed before diving into these sources.
What's that?
When you hear California takes the most water from the Colorado River, the image that immediately flashes in your mind is a million sparkling blue swimming pools in Los Angeles.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone thinks that.
You picture green lawns in Beverly Hills and giant decorative fountains in Hollywood.
It is the most pervasive myth regarding Western water. It feels intuitively correct because Los Angeles is so massive, but legally and physically, it's completely wrong.
It's totally wrong. The urban wholesaler that serves the Los Angeles area and roughly 19 million people, the Metropolitan Water District, or MWD, is actually incredibly junior in priority.
Very junior.
If California has to take a cut, LA is first on the chopping block. The vast, overwhelming majority of California's massive 4.4 million acre-foot slice is not going to coastal cities.
Well, what's not?
It is flowing into the deep, arid desert in the extreme southeast of the state, specifically to an entity called the Imperial Irrigation District, or IID.
Yes. The Imperial Irrigation District is a farming empire. They aren't just the biggest user in California. They are the single largest consumer of Colorado River water anywhere in the entire basin.
The whole basin.
They pull roughly 2.6 million acre-feet a year just for their own fields.
To put that in perspective for you guys, that one farming district in California uses more water than the entire state of Arizona.
Yep.
And vastly more than the entire state of Nevada.
It's massive.
So naturally, if I'm looking at this crashing system and we are quite literally dancing with Deadpool, my first thought is, why doesn't the federal government just step in and mandate cuts for the guy using the absolute most?
That's the logical question.
Right. If IID uses the most water, mandate that they cut back to save the river.
Because doing so would trigger a legal explosion that the federal government would almost certainly lose.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And to understand why, you have to understand the foundational doctrine of Western water law, prior appropriation.
I've always heard this summarized as first in time, first in right.
That's the exact phrase.
Meaning, the first person to show up at the river with a bucket and a shovel gets to keep using that water forever before anyone who shows up later.
That is exactly how it works. See, unlike the East Coast, where water rights are generally tied to owning land directly touching the water, the arid West developed a system based on putting water to what they call beneficial use.
Okay.
And the Imperial Valley pioneers were incredibly aggressive early on. Around the turn of the 20th century, I mean long before Hoover Dam was even a blueprint, they were out in the scorching desert digging massive canals by hand and with mules.
Wow, just manually diverting the river.
Exactly. Diverting the Colorado River to transform bone-dry desert into incredibly lucrative farmland.
And because they did the physical work to pull that water first, the law rewards them with immortality.
Basically, yeah.
Our sources outline this ironclad legal shield protecting IID. It's a concept called present perfected rights.
Right. Present perfected rights refer specifically to water uses that were firmly established and legally perfected prior to the 1929 Boulder Canyon Project Act.
Which was a federal legislation that authorized Hoover Dam.
Exactly. So because Imperial Valley farmers were already drawing massive amounts of water decades before the federal government even stepped in to manage the system, their legal claim sits at the absolute top of the priority stack.
They are senior to everyone.
Everyone.
They are senior to the massive cities of Los Angeles and San Diego.
Yep.
They are senior to the Central Arizona Project, which is that multi-billion-dollar canal system that pumps water uphill to keep Phoenix and Tucson alive.
All of them. Under the first-in-time, first-in-right framework, the law dictates that in a shortage, the people who arrive last are cut completely to zero before the people who arrived first lose a single drop.
I mean, that is just the structural irony paralyzing the whole basin. To save the physical river from collapse, the system desperately needs massive reductions from its largest user. But legally, the Imperial Irrigation District has the power to say no. Cut Arizona's cities first. Cut Nevada first. Cut Los Angeles first. Our rights are present, perfected, we were here first, and you cannot touch our water until everyone junior to us is completely dry.
That is the exact situation, which puts the federal government in an impossible bind.
Because if they force it,
If the Department of the Interior tries to mandate a forced cut on California's agricultural core, ID would immediately file an injunction. They'd take the federal government to court, and based on more than a century of established Western water law, the farmers would almost certainly win.
wow.
The law is designed flawlessly to protect the oldest user, but it just so happens that the oldest user is also the biggest user on a river that is rapidly vanishing.
So this raises the ultimate pragmatic question. What do you do when the river is physically crashing, but you are legally forbidden from using the stick of federal mandates?
You break out the carrot.
You use checkbooks.
Exactly. You use money.
And watching this play out over the last few years has been fascinating. Instead of launching a decades-long legal war over seniority, a war that the river physically does not have enough water to outlast, they shifted to a massive financial buyout strategy.
Yeah, let's track how this escalated because it happened fast. The true panic set in during August of 2021.
Okay.
For the first time in history, the federal government issued an official shortage declaration on the Colorado River. Lake Mead had dropped below the critical elevation trigger of 1,075 feet above sea level.
Which enacted Tier 1 shortages for 2022.
Right, which heavily impacted Arizona's farmers. But the water kept dropping. The next year, it triggered deeper Tier 2A cuts.
The system was visibly in free fall. I mean, you had states glaring at each other across the negotiating table.
It was tense. Very tense.
But then, in May of 2023, we saw a breakthrough. The lower basin states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, agreed to a plan to conserve a staggering 3 million acre-feet of water through the end of 2026.
But we must be clear about the motivation here. The states and the senior farmers didn't just altruistically volunteer to dry up their fields to save the river.
No, out of the goodness of their hearts.
No, they were heavily incentivized by the federal government. Roughly $1.2 billion in federal funding, primarily from the Inflation Reduction Act, was deployed to essentially buy that water back.
Okay, I want to dig into the mechanics of how that money actually translates into wet water left in a lake.
Yeah.
Because we are talking about a mechanism called paid fallowing.
Yes.
How does a paid fallowing deal actually work on the ground for a farmer in the Imperial Valley? Like, what actually happens?
Well, fallowing is an old agricultural practice where you intentionally leave a field unplanted for a season to let the soil recover.
Sure.
But in this context, paid fallowing is a direct financial transaction for water conservation. The federal government, or sometimes a large municipal water agency, approaches a senior farmer who holds an ironclad right to pull water from the river. Let's say this farmer grows alfalfa, which is an incredibly water-intensive forage crop used for cattle feed.
Very thirsty crop.
Very. The government basically says, look, we know your legal right is bulletproof. We can't take your water, but we will write you a check that equals or perhaps even exceeds the profit margin you would have made from growing and selling that alfalfa.
Okay, and in exchange?
In exchange, you agree to lock your head gate, leave your field as bare dirt for the year, and leave your legally entitled water sitting in Lake Mead.
Wow. So that's precisely the mechanism. It is temporarily buying the water right out from under the crop.
You are substituting federal dollars for agricultural revenue to balance the water ledger. And as a short-term emergency measure, it has been wildly successful.
It's astounding when you look at the metrics. I mean, California, the state with the massive 4.4 million acre-foot entitlement, actually led the charge on the volume of conservation in this deal.
They really stepped up.
Yeah, through these paid fallowing programs and infrastructure efficiency upgrades, projections showed California using just 3.76 million acre-feet in 2025.
To put that in historical context, 3.76 million acre-feet is California's lowest usage of Colorado River water since 1949.
1949.
Yeah. They rolled back their water consumption by 3/4 of a century.
It's a massive reduction, completely bought and paid for. And California's water managers actually doubled down on this.
They did.
In December of 2025, they went back to the table and offered up an additional 440,000 acre-feet per year in conservation. They essentially said, we can push our farmers even further, we can leave even more water in the lake, but
There was a massive string attached to that offer.
there always is, right?
Always. California made this offer of extra voluntary conservation absolutely contingent on mandatory cuts being shared by all 7 states, including the Upper Basin. They essentially drew a line in the sand and said, we are willing to bleed more to save the system, but only if everyone else is forced to bleed alongside us.
which, as we'll see shortly, went over like a lead balloon in places like Colorado and Utah.
Oh, they hated it.
But before we get to the massive political civil war between the U.S. states, we have to look south. Because this river and its structural deficit does not stop at the border. This river is an international boundary.
And this is a vital piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked in domestic debates.
Yeah, people forget.
Mexico is a sovereign partner on this river. Under the 1944 U.S.-Mexico Water Treaty, the United States is legally obligated to deliver 1.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water to Mexico every single year.
The treaty also allows for up to 200,000 acre-feet in surplus years, though, considering we are talking about Deadpool, surplus years feel like a relic of a bygone era.
Yeah, we aren't seeing surplus years anymore.
Right. The administration of this treaty is handled binationally by an agency called the International Boundary and Water Commission, or the IBWC.
Now, for decades after the 1944 treaty was signed, the U.S. government kind of patted itself on the back. They looked at the gauges at the border and saw exactly 1.5 million acre-feet crossing the line.
Mission accomplished.
Right. Mathematically, they were fulfilling their treaty obligation to the letter. But in the 1960s, this erupted into a massive diplomatic rupture over a factor the treaty barely addressed.
The quality of that water.
Yes, the quality.
The issue was salinity.
Yeah.
Salt. I mean, it's a river flowing through a desert. It's naturally going to pick up some minerals along the way. But how does river water get so incredibly salty that it sparks an international crisis between two allied nations?
It comes down to the mechanics of desert agriculture upstream in the United States. Specifically, the crisis centered around a massive irrigation project in Arizona called the Welton-Mohawk District.
Okay, what happened there?
Well, when you pull water out of the river and flood a desert field to grow crops, the water interacts with the soil. And desert soils are naturally rich in ancient salts and minerals.
So the irrigation water essentially washes the soil, picking up all those salts, and a lot of that water doesn't get absorbed by the plant, right? It seeps down past the roots.
Right. And to prevent the soil from becoming totally waterlogged and, killing the crops, farmers have to install drainage systems underground.
Okay.
Those drains collect that excess water, which is now heavily concentrated with salt, fertilizers, and pesticides, and pump it away from the fields.
Where does it go?
In the case of Welton-Mohawk, they pumped this toxic agricultural brine right back into the main channel of the Colorado River, just upstream of the Mexican border.
Oh, wow. So the U.S. is checking its gauges saying, yep, we are sending exactly 1.5 million acre-feet. But the water crossing the border had become so heavily laden with salt that when Mexican farmers in the Mexicali Valley applied it to their field, it literally burned the roots of their crops.
Exactly. The U.S. was fulfilling the quantity requirement of the treaty by delivering agricultural poison.
It's awful.
The Mexican government was understandably furious. They argued that delivering toxic water was a fundamental violation of the spirit of the treaty.
Of course.
It took years of tense negotiations to find a fix, culminating in August 1973 with an agreement called Minute 242.
The bureaucracy loves a long title. The official name is the Permanent and Definitive Solution to the International Problem of the Salinity of the Colorado River.
It's quite a flex to put permanent and definitive solution in the title of a water agreement.
Yeah, good luck with that. But Minute 242 did establish a very strict definitive metric.
It did.
It legally capped the salinity of the water delivered to Mexico. The agreement mandated that the water crossing the border could have a salinity level of no more than 115 parts per million, give or take 30 parts above whatever the salinity level was upstream at the Imperial Dam in the U.S.
Right, so it forced the U.S. to take total responsibility for the salt it was adding to the river in that final stretch.
And to meet this strict new requirement, the U.S. government authorized a monumental piece of infrastructure, the Yuma desalting plant.
Authorized by the 1974 Salinity Control Act and finally completed in 1992 after massive delays and cost overruns, this plant was an engineering marvel.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was designed to process roughly 73 million gallons of water a day.
That's huge.
The plan was to intercept that highly saline drainage from Welton-Mohawk, push it through a state-of-the-art reverse osmosis facility, strip the salt out, and put clean, fresh water back into the river to be delivered to Mexico.
But the history of the Yuma desalting plant is one of the most incredible paradoxes I've ever read about.
It's pretty bizarre.
Let me try an analogy here. Imagine you have a patient whose blood is completely toxic. You spend millions of dollars building the most advanced, state-of-the-art dialysis machine in the world, capable of perfectly cleaning their blood. You hook them up, all the tubes are ready.
Okay, I'm with you.
But then the hospital administrators do the math and realize, you know what? The electricity to run this dialysis machine is incredibly expensive. It's actually much cheaper to just surgically reroute the toxic blood out of the patient's body into a biohazard bucket in the alley, and we'll just pump the patient full of fresh, clean blood from the donor bank.
That is an incredibly grim but entirely accurate analogy for what happened in Yuma.
It's wild, right?
Yes, because despite costing hundreds of millions of dollars to build, the Yuma desalting plant has sat idle, maintained in a state of ready reserve for almost its entire existence. It has rarely ever run at capacity.
Because reverse osmosis is an incredibly energy-intensive process.
Very.
You're using massive high-pressure pumps to force water through microscopic membranes. The electricity bill alone is astronomical.
Precisely. The U.S. government realized very quickly that the operational costs were unjustifiable. So they implemented the bypass strategy.
The biohazard bucket.
Right. They built a massive concrete canal that intercepts that toxic, salty agricultural drainage from Welton Mohawk, bypasses the Colorado River mainstem entirely, and dumps the brine directly into a wetland area in Mexico called the Ciénaga de Santa Clara.
Just bypassing the river completely.
Yes, which sits completely outside the river's delivery channel.
They just threw the dirty water away so it wouldn't count against the salinity cap.
That's it.
But by throwing that volume of water away, they created a deficit.
Right.
They still owed Mexico the volume of water they bypassed.
Exactly. So to make up for the bypassed volume and still hit the 1.5 million acre-foot treaty requirement, the U.S. had to release fresh, clean water out of the storage in Lake Mead to send down the river.
The fresh donor blood.
You got it. The math dictated that it was financially cheaper to simply drain Lake Mead faster than it was to turn on the power switch for the desalting plant.
I mean, that is just, wow.
Yeah. As the sources note, the Yuma plant stands today as a monument to solving an environmental crisis via creative plumbing, bypass canals, and diplomacy, rather than utilizing actual desalination technology.
It's just wild. But the beautiful thing about the international story is how it evolves.
It really does.
Because as we move into the 21st century and aridification takes hold, the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico shifts from this contentious fight over toxic salt into something that actually resembles true co-management of a dying resource.
It was a necessary shift. Both countries looked at the dropping elevations of Lake Mead and realized that strict adherence to the old rules would be mutually assured destruction.
Nobody wins.
Right. If Mexico demanded its full 1.5 million acre-feet no matter what, Lake Mead would hit dead pool faster, and then nobody gets water.
Right.
So they negotiated groundbreaking new agreements through the IBWC, Minute 319 in 2012 and Minute 323 in 2017.
And these minutes were revolutionary because they folded Mexico into a shared shortage framework.
Yeah.
Historically, Mexico's delivery was guaranteed. But under these new rules, Mexico agreed that if Lake Mead dropped to specific trigger elevations, they would proactively take reduced deliveries.
They agreed to share the pain of the shortage, just like Arizona and Nevada did after the 2021 declarations.
Furthermore, these minutes allowed Mexico a flexibility they never had before. They allowed Mexico to use Lake Mead essentially as an offshore savings account.
Which is huge. Mexico could choose to defer portions of their water delivery and leave that water stored behind Hoover Dam in the U.S.
Which helps everyone.
It really does. This not only helped Mexico manage its own supply during infrastructure repairs, but it kept the physical water level in Lake Mead slightly higher, benefiting the entire U.S. lower basin system.
It's an incredible level of international cooperation over a fiercely contested, scarce resource. But these agreements also did something else. They brought the emotional, ecological heart of the river back into the conversation.
They finally addressed the tragedy of the Colorado River Delta.
Yeah. Historically, before the 20th century proliferation of dams and diversions, the Colorado River didn't end in a trickle. It ended in a sprawling 2 million acre wetland delta at the Gulf of California.
It was magnificent. Early explorers described it as an incredibly rich, vibrant ecosystem, teeming with jaguars, millions of migratory birds, and vast forests of cottonwoods.
But because human law apportioned every single drop of the river to a farm or a city upstream, the river was bled completely dry before it ever reached the ocean.
Oh, sad.
For decades, the magnificent delta was reduced to miles of cracked mud and salt flats. The river literally died in the desert.
However, under Minute 319 and later Minute 323, the U.S. and Mexico agreed to try and bring a piece of it back. They engineered what are known as pulse flows.
The 2014 pulse flow is one of the most profoundly moving events in modern environmental history. Tell us how that worked mechanically.
So in the spring of 2014, the two countries coordinated a massive historic release. They opened the gates of the Morelos Dam on the U.S.-Mexico border for about 8 weeks.
Just let it flow.
They let a surge of over 100,000 acre-feet of water flow down the ancient, completely dry riverbed. And for the first time in years, the Colorado River kissed the sea.
They reconnected the river to the ocean. And it wasn't just a symbolic trickle, right? The ecological response was immediate and explosive.
Nature rebounded almost instantly. The dormant seeds in the soil sprouted, the vegetation greened up along the corridor, groundwater tables recharged, and the birds returned.
Wow.
The success of that 2014 event led to a commitment in minute 323 to continue these efforts, including another targeted release of roughly 35,000 acre-feet in 2021, combined with U.S. funding to support on-the-ground habitat restoration by conservation groups in Mexico.
I really want to emphasize how profound this is for everyone listening. In a basin characterized by bitter lawsuits, where massive cities, tech billionaires, and century-old farming empires are engaged in a zero-sum fight for economic survival.
Yeah.
Two sovereign countries actively chose to budget precious, scarce water for a dead river. They allocated a portion of their shrinking bank account purely for the sake of the environment.
It is an incredibly rare case of two nations valuing ecological restoration alongside economic utility. It proves that the legal framework can adapt to value things other than just alfalfa and subdivisions.
Right.
However, as inspiring as the pulse flows are, we are running out of time. And this brings us to the terrifying cliffhanger we are living in right now.
Yeah, because everything we just talked about, the shared shortage agreements with Mexico, the pulse flows, the specific rules dictating how Lake Mead and Lake Powell balance their water levels, it all comes with an expiration date.
It all ends. The foundational rules operating the entire reservoir system right now are known as the 2007 Interim Guidelines.
Okay.
Those guidelines, along with all the international minutes that are tied to them, completely expire at the end of December 2026.
Wait, I have to push back on this timeline. If these guidelines were negotiated and signed in 2007, that means every water manager, every governor, every federal official has known for nearly 2 decades that 2026 was the absolute deadline.
They've known for a long time, yes.
So how is it possible that we're sitting here right now looking at a ticking clock with absolutely no post-2026 plan in place?
Because the basin has fractured. It has cracked wide open along an old, deep ideological and economic fault line.
The upper basin versus the lower basin.
Exactly. They possess two fundamentally incompatible views on how the pain of a shrinking river should be distributed in the future.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the arguments here. Let's start with the lower basin, Arizona, California, Nevada.
Okay.
If I'm sitting in Phoenix or Los Angeles and the reservoirs are 2/3 empty, my immediate reaction is probably, hey, the river's dying, the climate is warming, everybody needs to take a haircut together. Are they pushing for mandatory across-the-board cuts?
Essentially, yes. The lower basin's proposal revolves around the concept of shared sacrifice. They argue that future mandatory cuts should be basin-wide and triggered automatically by the physical water levels in Lakes Mead and Powell.
Okay, so tied to the actual water we have.
Right. If the combined storage of those reservoirs drops below a certain threshold, everybody, upper and lower basin alike, must take a proportional cut to prevent the system from hitting dead pool.
So they're saying climate change is shrinking the entire system, so everyone must share the pain equally based on the actual physical reality of the water in the lakes.
That's their stance, yeah.
Which sounds completely logical on its face. If the water isn't there, everyone cuts back. But the upper basin, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, they absolutely despise this proposal.
Oh, they hate it.
They're vehemently against mandatory cuts tied to reservoir levels. Why? What is their legal justification for refusing to share the cuts?
Their argument is rooted deeply in the original math of the 1922 Compact and the differing hydrology of the two regions. The upper basin points out a stark reality. They currently use far less than their legally apportioned 7.5 million acre-feet.
Oh, I agree.
While the lower basin regularly maxes out its legal share propped up by the massive storage of Lake Mead, the upper basin typically only uses about 4 to 4.5 million acre-feet a year.
Right, because they don't have the same year-round 365-day growing seasons as the Imperial Valley.
Exactly.
And they don't have massive exploding desert metropolises like Phoenix and Vegas relying almost entirely on the river. Plus, they rely on winter snowpack directly. They don't have a giant Lake Mead to guarantee their delivery if it doesn't snow.
Right. They take the hit immediately if it's a dry year. So the upper basin's position is we are already inherently sacrificing. We are using millions of acre-feet less than we are legally allowed to use.
So why should they cut more?
Exactly. Why should we be punished and forced to mandate cuts on our own local economies just to prop up the lower basin's chronic overconsumption?
I see their point.
Furthermore, legally, they refuse to be held strictly to delivery obligations to the lower basin that were set during that wet era of the 1920s. They argue that the hydrology simply no longer supports those ancient delivery requirements, and nature, not the upper basin, is causing the shortage.
It's an incredible stalemate. Each side views itself as the primary victim making the real sacrifice. The lower basin says, look at us. We are the ones actually cutting our use right now through these expensive paid fallowing deals. We're taking the immediate pain.
And the upper basin responds, we've taken the pain for decades by never developing our full legal share in the first place and suffering shortages every time it's a dry winter.
And that gridlock has led to a dramatic, terrifying timeline of recent failures. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has been desperately trying to force a consensus so they can draft the environmental impact statements for the post-2026 rules.
They've been trying so hard.
But the states missed a critical framework deadline on November 11th, 2025.
They just blew right past it, couldn't agree on a framework at all.
Then the federal government set a subsequent consensus target for mid-February 2026.
And that deadline also passed with zero agreement.
Which means as we inch closer to December 31st, 2026, the Department of the Interior is being forced into a corner. They've had to threaten federal intervention.
They had no choice.
They've signaled they will proceed with drafting their own federal alternative rules if the states can't act like adults and figure out a compromise.
And a federal mandate is the absolute last thing the states want because it strips them of their sovereignty over their own water destinies.
Nobody wants the feds stepping in.
Yeah. So in a desperate attempt to avoid federal intervention and buy themselves more time to argue, we saw a proposal emerge in May 2026 from the lower basin.
Right, the short-term bridge agreement.
Yes. The lower basin floated a plan offering up to 3.2 million acre-feet of conservation over 2 years, extending through 2028.
Okay, so just buying a couple years.
It's essentially slapping a multi-million-dollar Band-Aid on a massive gunshot wound.
Wow.
It doesn't solve the fundamental post-2026 structural rules. It just aims to keep the reservoirs from hitting dead pool for another 24 months, while the lawyers and water managers keep fighting in conference rooms.
But this brings us to the ultimate risk. What happens if they just can't agree? What if the bridge expires, the ideologies are too entrenched, and there is no post-2026 plan? What is the nuclear option that everyone is so terrified of?
The nuclear option is compact litigation. It is the shadow hanging over every single negotiation right now.
What does compact litigation actually look like in practice? Like, does someone just file a lawsuit in a local court?
No, when sovereign states sue each other over an interstate compact, it goes straight to the original jurisdiction of the United States Supreme Court.
Oh, straight to the top.
Yes, the Supreme Court would be tasked with interpreting what the 1922 compact actually requires today, given the undeniable physical fact that the water the compact assumed existed simply doesn't exist anymore.
But isn't that a good thing? I mean, shouldn't a neutral panel of judges just look at the math, settle the dispute once and for all, and tell everyone what their new slice of the pie is? Why are water managers so terrified of the Supreme Court?
Because the legal process is glacially slow and the climate crisis is moving at warp speed.
I see.
A Supreme Court fight over the Colorado River would trigger a massive legal freeze. It would involve the appointment of special masters, years of exhaustive discovery, endless briefings, and highly technical hydrologic arguments. The case could drag on for a decade or more.
And while the lawyers are arguing for 10 years, the river continues to dry up.
Exactly. Furthermore, litigation strips all the power and nuance away from the hydrologists, the local water managers, and the stakeholders who actually understand how the plumbing works.
Right.
It hands the fate of the water supply for 40 million people and a massive chunk of the U.S. economy over to a judge who might not fully grasp the intricate, on-the-ground realities of desert farming, municipal water grids, and tribal rights.
A court ruling is a blunt, uncompromising instrument.
Yes. Managing a dying river requires a scalpel.
You don't want a judge who has never seen an alfalfa field or a reservoir intake penstock deciding whether Phoenix gets drinking water or Imperial Valley gets irrigation.
Precisely. And so, as we look at the basin right now, that specter of a Supreme Court battle is the shadow that defines the current era. It's a game of chicken where the cliff is dead pool and nobody wants to be the first to swerve.
Okay, let's pull all of this together, because we've covered immense ground today. We started with a mathematical fantasy in 1922, a group of men in a room assuming an anomalously wet stretch of years was the permanent baseline reality.
Right.
We traced how that foundational error grew into a massive structural deficit, which was then compounded exponentially by 21st century aridification, a climate that is literally baking the snowpack into vapor before it can even reach the river.
We examined the ironclad legal armor of California's oldest farms, the Imperial Irrigation District, and the profound structural difficulty of asking the legally strongest users to take the biggest cuts to save the system.
Right, and we saw how the federal government has had to rely on billion-dollar checkbooks and paid fallowing just to buy time.
Yep.
We looked at the international border, where the U.S. fulfilled a treaty by poisoning Mexico's crops with salt, leading to diplomatic crises, a giant, unused billion-dollar desalting plant, and eventually the beautiful, heartbreaking reality of engineering pulse flows just to give a dead delta a brief drink of water.
And we end today in a terrifying standoff, a gridlocked basin split between the upper and lower halves, with the foundational operating rules expiring in mere months, relying on short-term bridges to avoid a catastrophic Supreme Court battle.
And this brings it right back to the invisible dependence we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because all of this, the 1922 Compact, the fallowing deals, the treaties, the threat of the Supreme Court, it is the invisible scaffolding holding up the life you live.
It really is.
The affordability of the winter vegetables in your fridge, the power generated from millions of homes on the Western grid, the entire economic engine of the American Southwest. It is all subsidized by this quiet, desperate, ongoing negotiation over an overpromised shrinking river.
And I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over as we end this deep dive. The laws governing the Colorado River, the doctrine of prior appropriation, the present perfected rights, the rigid 7.5 million acre-foot apportionments of the 1922 Compact, they were designed absolutely perfectly by human beings to distribute water.
They did what they were supposed to do.
Our triumph of legal engineering and negotiation, but the fundamental, inescapable truth is this. Human law cannot generate rain.
Wow.
Human legal frameworks can allocate every single drop on paper, but they cannot force the snow to fall in the Rocky Mountains.
So as we look past 2026, the ultimate question is no longer just which state has the better lawyers or who has the deepest pockets for fallowing.
No, the question is, when the legal right to water fundamentally outlasts the physical existence of the water itself, who bends first? Does our rigid system of human law finally bend to adapt to physical reality, or do we blindly hold on to our paper rights and wait for nature to simply break the system entirely?
It's the ultimate reality check. You can write all the fine print you want, you can argue in the Supreme Court for a decade, but you cannot negotiate with a dry riverbed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.